Captain Derek Matthews walked through Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, exhausted after completing a 14-hour transatlantic flight from London to Dallas. He'd been flying for Skyline Airlines for 12 years, the last 5 as a senior captain qualified on wide-body international aircraft. At 36 years old, he was one of the youngest captains in the airline's fleet and one of only 43 black captains among Skyline's 4,200 pilots. Derek had just finished his duty period and was now deadheading back to his base in New York as a passenger. Company policy allowed pilots to fly first class when traveling for work, a small perk that made the constant travel more bearable. He was dressed casually in designer jeans, a comfortable hoodie and sneakers. After spending 14 hours in uniform, he'd changed in the crew lounge before heading to his gate. His airline ID badge was in his bag, and he carried his boarding pass on his phone showing his first-class seat assignment, 2A. Gate 37 was busy with passengers boarding Flight 2847 to JFK. Derek approached the gate agent, a young woman who smiled and scanned his mobile boarding pass without issue. "Have a good flight, Captain Matthews," she said, noting his employee status in the system. Derek nodded and walked down the jetway onto the Boeing 777. He was looking forward to sleeping during the 3-hour flight, having been awake for over 18 hours. As he entered the first-class cabin, he noticed it was nearly full. A flight attendant greeted him warmly, recognizing him as crew. "Evening, Captain. 2A is right here on the left." Derek stowed his bag in the overhead bin and settled into his seat, pulling out his noise-cancelling headphones and preparing to sleep as soon as they were airborne. Then he heard a commotion at the front of the aircraft. A woman's voice, loud and authoritative, was speaking to the flight attendants near the door. "I need to speak to the passenger in 2A. There's been an issue with his boarding pass." Derek looked up to see a woman in a Skyline Airlines uniform with a gate manager badge approaching him. Patricia Collins was in her late 40s, her expression stern and suspicious. "Sir, I need to see your boarding pass and identification." Derek pulled out his phone and showed her the digital boarding pass. "It's right here, seat 2A. Patricia barely glanced at it. "Whose ticket is this?" "Mine. I'm an employee traveling on company business. I need to see your employee ID." Derek reached into his bag and pulled out his Skyline Airlines crew identification card, which clearly showed his photo, name and rank. "Captain Derek Matthews." Patricia looked at the ID, then back at Derek, her skepticism apparent. "This doesn't look right. How did you get a captain's ID?" Derek blinked, unsure if he'd heard correctly. "Because I am a captain. I fly for this airline. Sir, I need you to come with me. We're going to verify this at the gate." Other passengers were watching now, the confrontation impossible to ignore in the confined first-class cabin. "Verify what?" Derek asked, his voice calm but firm. "I've shown you my boarding pass, my employee ID, and my identification. What exactly needs verification? I have concerns about the authenticity of your credentials. Please exit the aircraft so we can resolve this at the gate." One of the flight attendants, a woman Derek had flown with before, spoke up. "Patricia, this is Captain Matthews. He's one of our 777 captains. There's no issue here." Patricia turned to the flight attendant. "I'm handling this, Jennifer. Please return to your duties." She turned back to Derek. "Sir, you need to leave the aircraft now, or I'll call security." Derek felt anger rising, but kept his voice controlled. "I'm not leaving. I'm a qualified passenger with a valid ticket and proper identification. I'm also an employee of this airline with more seniority than you have." "Your attitude is becoming a problem," Patricia said. "If you don't leave voluntarily, you'll be removed and banned from flying Skyline Airlines." Another passenger, a white man in his 60s, sitting across the aisle, spoke up. "Excuse me, but this seems excessive. He's shown you his ID. Why are you harassing him?" Patricia's face reddened. "Sir, this doesn't concern you. Please remain in your seat." Derek made a decision. He pulled out his phone and began recording. Texas was a one-party consent state, making the recording legal. "For the record, I'm Captain Derek Matthews, employee number 847293, senior captain qualified on Boeing 777 and 787 aircraft. I've presented valid boarding pass, employee identification, and government ID. Gate manager Patricia Collins is demanding I leave the aircraft despite having proper credentials. I'm recording this interaction for documentation purposes." Patricia's expression shifted from hostile to alarmed. "You can't record me without permission. Texas is a one-party consent state. I can absolutely record this, and I'm documenting what appears to be discrimination based on my race. I never mentioned race. Patricia snapped. You didn't have to. You saw a young black man in casual clothes in first class and assumed I didn't belong. You've questioned credentials you wouldn't question from a white passenger, and you're threatening to remove me despite valid documentation. Patricia pulled out her radio. Security to gate 37. I need assistance removing a disruptive passenger. The flight attendant, Jennifer, protested. Patricia, this is wrong. Captain Matthews hasn't been disruptive. You're the one creating a scene. I'm the gate manager. I have final authority over boarding. This passenger is denied boarding. I'm not a passenger. I'm a fellow employee. Derek's frustration was showing now. Call the chief pilot's office. Call crew scheduling. Call anyone who can verify that I'm exactly who I say I am. You'll have the opportunity to verify your identity at the gate with security present. 2 airport security officers arrived, both appearing confused about why they'd been called. What's the situation? One asked. Patricia pointed at Derek. This individual is refusing to leave the aircraft. I've denied him boarding due to questionable credentials. The security officer looked at Derek. Sir, can you show me your boarding pass and ID? Derek showed both, plus his pilot's license, his crew ID, and his employee badge from his bag. The security officer reviewed everything carefully. These all look legitimate to me. What's the issue? Patricia insisted. I have concerns about authenticity. I'm exercising my authority as gate manager to deny boarding pending verification. The security officer looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, everything appears in order. This gentleman has multiple forms of identification, all indicating he's an airline employee and authorized passenger. I'm the gate manager. My decision stands. Derek spoke to the security officers. I'm being removed because I'm black, and she doesn't believe a young black man can be an airline captain. This is racial profiling and discrimination. The second security officer sighed. Ma'am, I really think we should verify his employment before removing him. He has crew credentials. I've made my decision. Remove him now, or I'll report you for insubordination. The security officers, clearly unhappy but following the gate manager's authority, asked Derek to leave the aircraft. Derek, recognizing that physically resisting would only make the situation worse, gathered his belongings. I'm leaving under protest. This is discrimination, and it will be reported to the highest levels of this airline's management. As he walked off the aircraft, dozens of passengers watched. Several pulled out their phones and began recording. One woman called out, "This is wrong. He showed you his ID." Patricia followed Derek into the jetway, apparently determined to ensure he didn't reboard. At the gate, Derek immediately called the chief pilot's office emergency line. It was almost midnight, but there was always someone on duty. This is Captain Derek Matthews, employee 847293. I've just been removed from Flight 2847 by gate manager Patricia Collins, despite valid credentials and boarding pass. I need immediate verification of my employment status and reinstatement to my flight. The duty officer was shocked. Captain Matthews, you were removed from a flight. That doesn't make any sense. Hold on. Within 3 minutes, Derek's phone rang. It was Captain Stephen Morrison, the chief pilot for Skyline Airlines. Derek, what the hell happened? I just got a call that you were removed from a flight. Derek explained the situation, his voice tight with controlled anger. Captain Morrison listened, his own anger evident in his responses. That's completely unacceptable. I'm calling the airport operations manager now. You should have been boarding that flight, not removed from it. Within 10 minutes, the airport operations manager arrived at gate 37, along with the Skyline Airlines corporate supervisor. Patricia Collins was called over. Mrs. Collins, did you remove Captain Derek Matthews from Flight 2847? Patricia's confidence was wavering now. I had concerns about his credentials. I was following security protocols. What concerns? He's a 12-year employee, a senior captain, with perfect documentation. He was dressed casually. He looked too young to be a captain. I thought his ID might be fake. The operations manager's expression hardened. You removed one of this airline's senior captains because you didn't think he looked like a pilot. Do you realize what you've done? Derek spoke up. She profiled me based on my race and age. She saw a young black man in first class and assumed I didn't belong. Despite seeing my employee ID, my pilot's license and my boarding pass, she insisted on removing me. Patricia protested. "I never said anything about race." "You didn't have to," Derek said. "Your actions made it clear. How many white pilots have you removed from flights for looking too young? How many white passengers have you questioned in first class?" The corporate supervisor pulled Patricia aside for a private conversation. Derek was escorted back to the aircraft, which had been delayed 45 minutes by the incident. The entire first-class cabin applauded as he reboarded and took his seat. The flight attendant, Jennifer, apologized profusely. "Captain, I'm so sorry. I tried to tell her you were crew." "It's not your fault," Derek said. "You did the right thing speaking up." The flight eventually departed, nearly an hour late. Derek was too angry to sleep. Instead, he spent the flight documenting everything, the exact statements Patricia had made, the timeline of events, the witnesses, and his recording of the confrontation. The next morning, Derek was called to a meeting at Skyline Airlines corporate headquarters in New York. Present were the chief pilot, the VP of flight operations, the head of HR, and the company's general counsel. "Derek, we want to apologize for what happened last night," the VP of flight operations began. "What you experienced was completely unacceptable. Apologies are appreciated, but I want to know what's being done about Patricia Collins. She racially profiled me, abused her authority, and caused me to be humiliated in front of an entire aircraft of passengers." The general counsel spoke. "Mrs. Collins has been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation. Based on preliminary findings, we'll likely be terminating her employment." "Has she done this before?" The Trester looked uncomfortable. "We've pulled her personnel file. There have been complaints, 3 incidents over the past 6 years, where passengers of color claimed discrimination. None were formally investigated because the complaints were vague, and Collins denied any bias. So she's been doing this for years, and no one stopped her. We failed in our oversight," the VP admitted. "We should have investigated more thoroughly. We didn't, and you paid the price for our failure." Derek leaned forward. "Here's what I want. Full investigation of Patricia Collins, with review of every passenger complaint she's been involved in. Mandatory anti-bias training for all gate agents and managers. Clear policies that crew identification must be respected. And I want a public statement from Skyline Airlines acknowledging what happened and committing to addressing discrimination." The executives agreed to all of Derek's demands. Over the next 2 weeks, Skyline's investigation uncovered a pattern of discriminatory behavior by Patricia Collins. Over 6 years, she'd been involved in 27 incidents where passengers of color were denied boarding, removed from flights, or subjected to additional screening. In each case, Collins cited concerns or policy violations that she didn't apply equally to white passengers. Black passengers in first class or business class were particularly targeted, with Collins frequently questioning whether they could afford their tickets, or suggesting they'd been upgraded by mistake. Several black airline employees, including 2 pilots and 4 flight attendants, reported being questioned or challenged by Collins when traveling in uniform or on company business. The investigation also revealed that Collins' supervisors had received multiple complaints but had taken minimal action. Her longevity with the airline and lack of explicit racial language in her justifications had allowed her pattern of discrimination to continue unchallenged. Skyline Airlines terminated Patricia Collins' employment and issued a public statement. "Skyline Airlines has zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind. A recent incident involving the removal of one of our senior captains from a flight has exposed unacceptable patterns of bias in our ground operations. We've terminated the employee responsible and are implementing comprehensive reforms to ensure all passengers and employees are treated with respect and dignity, regardless of race. We apologize to Captain Derek Matthews and to every passenger who's experienced discrimination at our airline." The statement made national news. Derek gave interviews to several outlets, including CNN and the New York Times, about his experience and the broader issue of discrimination in aviation. "This wasn't just about me," Derek explained in one interview. "I'm a captain with 12 years experience. I had the credentials, the documentation, and the professional standing to fight back. But how many black passengers have been removed from flights by Patricia Collins, or people like her, and had no recourse? How many didn't have the resources or platform to challenge what happened?" The story resonated. Dozens of people contacted Skyline Airlines with their own stories of discrimination at airport gates. Some involved Collins specifically. Others involved different agents at different airports exhibiting similar patterns of racial profiling. 3 months after the incident, Skyline Airlines implemented sweeping reforms. 1. Bias training. Mandatory quarterly training for all customer-facing employees on recognizing and preventing racial profiling and discrimination. 2. Complaint review. Independent review of all passenger discrimination complaints from the past decade, with renewed investigations where patterns suggested bias. 3. Crew identification respect. Clear policy that employee credentials must be honored, and that crew members should never be questioned or challenged based on appearance. 4. Escalation procedures. New protocols requiring supervisory approval before denying boarding to any passenger with valid documentation. 5. Passenger advocate. Creation of a passenger rights office where discrimination complaints could be filed and tracked. 6. Diversity metrics. Regular reporting on complaint patterns by demographic categories to identify bias trends. 7. Manager accountability.
Discrimination findings would result in immediate termination, regardless of tenure or position. The reforms cost Skyline Airlines over $8 million to implement but resulted in significant improvements in customer satisfaction, particularly among passengers of color, who reported feeling more respected and fairly treated. 6 months after the incident, Derek was invited to speak at Skyline's annual leadership conference. Standing in front of 300 managers and executives, he shared his experience and its lessons. When Patricia Collins saw me in first class, she didn't see a captain. She didn't see a professional with 12 years of experience and thousands of flight hours. She saw a young black man and assumed I didn't belong. That assumption wasn't conscious racism. Patricia probably didn't think of herself as racist, but she'd internalized biases that told her black people don't belong in first class, that young black men are suspicious, that when a black person has something valuable, they probably obtained it improperly. Those unconscious biases led her to question my credentials in ways she'd never question a white pilot. They led her to call security and have me removed, despite valid documentation. They led her to humiliate me in front of an aircraft full of passengers. Derek paused. The question for everyone in this room is, how many Patricia Collinses work for this airline? How many employees are making biased decisions every day, denying boarding to qualified passengers, subjecting people of color to extra scrutiny, making assumptions based on race rather than evidence? The answer is we don't know, because most of those decisions happen without witnesses, without documentation, without consequence. That needs to change, and it starts with each of you examining your own biases and creating cultures in your teams where discrimination is recognized and challenged. The speech received a standing ovation and became required viewing for all Skyline Airlines employees during their bias training. 1 year after the incident, Patricia Collins had left aviation entirely. She'd attempted to find work with other airlines, but Derek's case and the investigation findings followed her. She eventually took a job in retail management, a significant step down from her gate manager position. In a rare interview with an aviation industry publication, Collins gave what seemed like her most honest reflection. I thought I was doing my job. I thought I was protecting the company and ensuring only legitimate passengers boarded flights. But I was really just enforcing my own biases about who belongs in first class and who doesn't. When I saw Derek Matthews in casual clothes in first class, I immediately assumed something was wrong. A young black guy in sneakers and a hoodie couldn't possibly be a captain. I thought. That assumption was racist, even though I didn't recognize it at the time. I destroyed my career and humiliated someone who deserved respect. I can't undo that, but I hope my story serves as a warning to others in the industry. Examine your assumptions about who belongs where. Question whether you're making decisions based on evidence or bias, because bias destroys careers and harms people. 3 years after the incident, Derek was promoted to check airman, training and evaluating other pilots. He used his platform to mentor young pilots of color and advocate for diversity in aviation. 5 years after the incident, Skyline Airlines' pilot workforce had become measurably more diverse. Black pilots now represented 4.8% of the total, up from 1.9% when Derek's incident occurred. Latino and Asian American representation had also increased. The changes weren't solely because of Derek's case, but his experience and subsequent advocacy had contributed to airline-wide recognition that aviation needed to address its diversity and inclusion challenges. 10 years after the incident, Derek was a training captain and senior check airman, one of the most respected pilots in Skyline's fleet. He'd been instrumental in developing the airline's diversity recruiting programs and had personally mentored 15 young pilots of color through their early careers. He'd also become a national voice on discrimination in aviation, speaking at industry conferences and consulting with other airlines on implementing inclusive practices. During an interview marking the 10th anniversary of the incident, Derek reflected on its impact. Being removed from that flight was humiliating and infuriating, but it exposed a pattern of discrimination that had been happening for years to people who didn't have the resources or platform to fight back. Patricia Collins discriminated against me, but I wasn't her only victim. She was just one employee in one airline making biased decisions every day. The real problem was systemic. Airlines weren't tracking discrimination patterns, weren't taking complaints seriously, weren't holding employees accountable. My case forced Skyline to reckon with those systemic issues. The reforms that followed my incident benefited thousands of passengers and employees who'll never experience what I did because the system changed. That's what using power responsibly means. I could have accepted a settlement, stayed quiet, and moved on. Instead, I used my position as a senior captain and my platform to demand accountability and change. Not just for me, but for everyone who flies. Derek's story became a case study in aviation management courses used to teach about bias in customer service, the importance of respecting employee credentials, and the consequences of discrimination in highly regulated industries. And across Skyline Airlines, And eventually throughout the aviation industry, gate agents and managers learned a simple lesson: never make assumptions about passengers based on their appearance, because the person you're profiling might be the pilot who will fly your next flight, or the executive who controls your employment, or simply a human being who deserves respect regardless of who they are. Patricia Collins had removed the wrong passenger, not because Derek was a pilot or had power within the company, but because her discrimination exposed a systemic problem that finally received the attention and accountability it deserved.
Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.